Good evening, and welcome to another midweek study live stream brought to you by Bradford Christian College. Do check them out. You'll see their link in the description below, um, bradfordchristiancollege.com. Check out what they have there and the different degree programs, including a Master's of Theological Studies, and contact them with questions, asking more information. Um, and you might find that it's the right choice for you or a good recommendation for someone you might know. So please do check them out. All right, so this is our midweek study. We're in our series on the tradition of election sermons. And, I can't say for certain, but it looks to me like actually some of our previous videos have nothing to get overly excited about, but they've gained some traction. I'm seeing some additional views, and so that's good. And so if you are having to watch this video and you're thinking, what is this election sermons? What's going on here? Bradford Christian College channel on YouTube. Go there, click on playlists, and you'll see a playlist for the different streams we do during the week. And that's where you can find the past streams, watch those videos, and get yourself caught up. If you're in that catch-up mode, watch the videos at 1.5 speed, and you can get yourself caught up more quickly that way. And that way you can be caught up with where we're at in whichever stream or all the streams that you might want to follow. Okay, so with the election sermon stream here, the unique thing that we're doing here is we've already read through this sermon, election sermon from 1756 by Samuel Cooper. And he came to this conclusion here. And let me just read it again. The faith of Moses will point us to a better country. It will guide us to the only society where perfect devotion, benevolence, and happiness are found, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to an innumerable company of angels, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to God, the judge of all, to whom be dominion and glory forever. So that's how he concluded his 1756 election sermon. And this is a sermon that was given during or near the beginning of the French and Indian War, in which the colonists were kind of, I won't say forced, but kind of led into fighting on behalf of the king against the French and Indians in the colonies. And this was an election sermon faithfully held through the colonial years and actually well into the early years of the Republic, um, more than the early years of the Republic. Anyway, um, yeah, so this was an election sermon where Samuel Cooper was instructing through a sermon the newly elected leaders of the colony. Well, in fact, one of those leaders, at least not elected, but actually appointed by the king, that would be the governor. Now, the one that we've been reading most recently is from 1780, same minister, Samuel Cooper, and here he is giving the sermon to instruct those elected officials that are going to take up office in Massachusetts under the new Constitution, right? So 1776, independence is declared. All those colonies become free and independent states. That is essentially to say, free and independent little countries. Now, they already had an association or a union, if you will, through what they called their Continental Congress. So they already had something of a union, right? Eventually, they're going to establish the Articles of Confederation, and then that will then turn into or not really turn into, but be replaced by the Constitution that we know today. But in 1780, all right, this is what I get for not properly preparing. Let's go ahead and ask AI here. When did the Articles of Confederation operate? Let's see what the dates we get here, so we make sure we get this right. Grok thinking. Adopted by the Second Continental Congress, 1777, approved or ratified. Ratification was a slow process, right? So it wasn't until 1781 that the Articles of Confederation took effect. And then that's going to last, what, 7 years roughly. You get the Constitution that we know now, which eventually gets ratified 1789. Okay, so in 1780, the Articles of Confederation is in the process of trying to be ratified, right? But it's not yet. And so I think at that point, the Continental Congress, I guess maybe it would be the Second Continental Congress. I don't know what number it would be at that point, but the Continental Congress is the, if you will, national government or the government over this union of independent states. But the independent states needed their own state constitutions, and Massachusetts fought long and hard to come up with their state constitution by 1780. And that's what this sermon is about. Now, this may not have been the last paragraph we read. I think maybe, well, no, I got a line right there. So, yeah, this must be where we stopped last time. And I've got a note here, 1756. And the reason I have that note there is because this is really the first place that I noted in this 1780 sermon where he brings up something that really references that conclusion from 1756, and that is this idea of the city of the living God, the Jerusalem on high. And we just read that conclusion so you can see that. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with this paragraph right here, which really, this is a paragraph that teaches us a lot about the circumstances at the time, the thinking of these founding fathers. Um, I think it illustrates the providential view that they held. So let's read this again. By this conduct of our enemies, heaven has granted us an inestimable opportunity. Now, what conduct of the enemies is he talking about? Well, in the previous paragraph or paragraphs, he pointed out that the enemies, which would be Great Britain, conducted themselves in a way as to oppose independence, but ended up actually bringing about the circumstances that resulted in independence. In fact, let's see, where was it? Um, yeah, right here. No, not there. Right, where was it? Well, I guess it was farther back than I thought. But at one point, he made the statement that as the colonists, they were not looking for independence. It was they were found by it. It was that kind of a phrase. Let's see, where was that? Now I've got to find it. Yeah, here it is. Upon our present independence, sweet and valuable as the blessing is, we may read the inscription, I am found of them that sought me not. We cannot deny that when we were not searching for it, that is independence, it, independence, happily found us. And again, he says, we did not seek an independence. And it is equally certain that Britain, though she meant to oppose it, independence, with all her power, has by a strange infatuation taken the most direct and perhaps the only methods that could have established it, independence. Okay, so that's really telling to me about um, how we are to understand the thinking of the founding father generation. Okay, back to our paragraph here. Um, So that's the conduct of our enemies that he's referring to. Heaven has granted us an inestimable opportunity, and such as has been rarely, if ever, indulged to so great a people, an opportunity to avail ourselves of the wisdom and experience of all past ages, united with that of the present, of comparing what we have seen and felt ourselves with what we have known and read of others, and of choosing for ourselves, unencumbered with the pretensions of royal heirs or lordly peers, of feudal rights or ecclesiastical authority, that form of civil government which we judge most conducive to our own security and order, liberty and happiness. And again, I'm trying to always point out the word happy or happiness because it's not, for them, it's not what we think of with happiness. Or are you happy? Oh, yeah. Are you happy with your birthday presents? Are you happy with your Christmas presents? Does that bowl of ice cream make you happy? That's not what they're talking about here when they talk about happiness, okay? An opportunity, though surrounded with the flames of war, of deliberating and deciding upon this most interesting of all human affairs with calmness and freedom, this in all its circumstances is a singular event. It is hard to tell where another such scene was ever beheld. Right? So what our pastor is saying here is simply that in God's providence, he brought us to a circumstance that's unlike anything else in history. That we, the people, have this opportunity to really deliberate and decide upon a form of civil government that will provide security, order, but also liberty and happiness. And he's saying that's not been, well, he's saying it's hard to tell whether another such scene was ever beheld. He's saying, I'm not sure you can find another time in history that it was like this. And he goes on to give some more explanation here. The origin of most nations is covered with obscurity, veiled by fiction. The rise of our own is open as it is honorable. And the newborn state, may I not be allowed to say, is a spectacle to men and angels. Okay, so, he's saying prior to this point, you look at the history of other nations, most nations, and how it starts, there's obscurity. There's a veil of fiction, right? There's Romulus and Remus, Rome, and whatever. However, you know, the Greek city-states started or whatever, how Egypt began. There's obscurity there, but not so for this nation. This nation, its rise is open and honorable. Everybody's witnessing it. Everybody's witnessing the birth of this nation. And our pastor is not reluctant to say it's a spectacle to men and angels. For as piety, virtue, and morals are not a little interested in government, such a transaction has an aspect upon both worlds, and concerns us not only as members of civil society upon earth, but as candidates for the city of the living God, the Jerusalem on high. So when he says here, such a transaction has an aspect upon both worlds, right? So what he's talking about is the government that we're debating on here is rooted in piety, virtue, morals. And where do those come from? Religion. And what is the true religion? Christianity. And so that's why there's an aspect of both worlds involved in this. And so that to some extent, what's being done in what they're deciding upon in their civil society speaks to their understanding of the city of the living God, the Jerusalem on high. Okay, let's start here with happy people. And again, not people who got a bowl of ice cream. Okay, these are truly, he's wanting to talk about truly happy people who, not awed by the voice of a master, not chained by slavish customs, superstitions, and prejudices have deliberately framed the Constitution under which you choose to live, and are here to be subject to no laws by which you do not consent to bind yourselves. Okay, so he's actually describing the frame of government. Okay, and this has not really been known. It's been known to some extent, right? Parliament and such, but not to the extent that it's trying to be implemented here. In such an attitude, human nature appears with its proper dignity. On such a basis, life and all that sweetens and adorns it may rest with as much security as human imperfection can possibly admit. So here, what he is saying is that, if we do this right, if our governing ourselves under this Constitution is filled with piety, virtue, and morals, then as best as we're able, given our imperfect human nature, we can have life and all that sweetens and adorns it. In such a constitution, we find a country deserving to be loved and worthy to be defended. For what is our country? All right, so this is a really interesting question because there's been a lot of discussion across the interwebs and such about what is a country? Let's see what he says here. For what is a country? What is our country? Is it a soil of which, though we may be the present possessors, we can call no part our own? Or the air in which we first drew our breath, from which we may be confined in a dungeon or of which we may be deprived by the axe or the halter at the pleasure of a tyrant? Is not a country a constitution, an established frame of laws, of which a man may say, we are here united in society for our common security and happiness. These fields and these fruits are my own. The regulations under which I live are my own. I am not only a proprietor in the soil, but I am part of the sovereignty of my country. See, uh, the real issue is not no kings. The real issue is who's the rightful king. And what our pastor is saying here is that every citizen who is living under the Constitution, which is its established frame of laws that unites people in society. Why? Common security and happiness. There's that word again, happiness. All right, I need to mark it here. Happiness. Okay. Now, I'm telling you, this is not, oh, be happy. Don't worry, be happy. It's not that song. It's not, right? This happiness is of the same intensity and depth and richness as security, right? Now, these fields and these fruits are my own. What does that mean? Well, if they're my own, that's my property. Under this Constitution, there values private property, and I mean the private property is rightly valued when the owner of that private property enjoys the fruits of the labor of it. The regulations under which I live are my own. Okay, regulations, or I suppose you could say laws, but laws, regulations, those are things that together we agree on. We don't have we don't have some appointed or hired bureaucrats somewhere putting down a bunch of regulations that we're compelled to abide by. No, but all these things are going to be, we're going to have ownership in. That's the point. Every citizen's going to have ownership in it, or I should say every voting citizen. Um, because there's just some people that shouldn't be allowed to vote. We know that. We know that's true. Um, but so voting citizens are going to have an ownership in that, right? So that when they run up against that regulation, they're going to know, oh, well, together we agreed that this would be the regulation. I come to this point, and now I drive at 20 miles per hour up until that point, and then I can go back to 35 or whatever, right? And that's something we agreed to together for our common security and happiness. And so look at this. I'm not only a proprietor in the soil, right? The fields and the fruits of those fields, those are my property. I have ownership in those. I don't just have ownership in those, but as a proprietor, I have the right, and you might even say the obligation to see that they're productive. But I am part of the sovereignty of my country. Okay, now let's finish this paragraph so we don't say too much about what this last part means here. Such ought to be the community of men, and such adored by the goodness of the supreme ruler of the world. Such at present is our own country, of which this day affords a bright evidence and a glorious recognition. All right. So the citizen saying, I'm part of the sovereignty of my country, right? Um, you could say that what he's advocating here is citizenship king. For them, the real king of the state or the country is the citizen. In fact, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. Let's see, did Ben Franklin say that a president not re-elected is promoted to citizen? This may just be a myth or something, but no, he didn't say that a president not re-elected is promoted. There's no evidence in historical. Okay. Um, um, what was said about presidents not being re-elected during constitutional convention? Because I think there was some debate about when they were debating the length of terms, and I think it was. All right, so AI is not going to give it to me. Maybe one of you know. You can put it in the comments what I'm thinking about. But anyway, here we see that the idea of the true sovereignty in the state or the nation, as understood by founding fathers, the true sovereignty is with the people themselves, the citizens. All right, continuing on. To the disappointment of our enemies and the joy of our friends, we have now attained a settled government with a degree of peace and unanimity, all circumstances considered truly surprising. The sagacity, the political knowledge, the patient deliberation, the constant attention to the grand principles of liberty, and the mutual condescension and candor under a diversity of apprehension respecting the modes of administration exhibited by those who were appointed to form this Constitution and by the people who ratified it must do immortal honor to our country. It is, we believe, a happy foundation for many generations, and the framers of it are indeed the fathers of their country, since nothing is so essential to the increase and universal prosperity of a community as a constitution of government founded in justice and friendly to liberty. Such men have a monument of glory more durable than brass or marble. Okay, so now that's an interesting phrase right there because I remember that from the 1756 sermon where he talked about Moses not having a monument like others have, and yet Moses far outshining them in terms of his glory, if you will. Now, he's using the word country throughout here, but he is talking about um, their, what we would understand their state or their Commonwealth constitution. Um, but I think you will find that for these new free and independent states, that the people who lived in these states, that was their first country, the state in which they now lived, and the what would become the United States, the States United, was essentially their second country. That's the way they thought of things. They didn't think of themselves as citizens of the United States first and then citizens of their state. They thought about themselves as citizens of their state first, and then citizens through their state, citizens of the United States. And that is um, that is different than the way we think about things today. Continuing on, I need not enlarge before such an audience upon the particular excellencies of this Constitution, how effectually it makes the people the keepers of their own liberties, with whom they are certainly safest. Well, that's interesting. How nicely it poises the powers of government in order to render them, as far as human foresight can, what God ever designed they should be. Render them, we're talking about the powers of government here, render them what God ever designed they should be, powers only to do good. I wonder how Reverend Cooper would feel if he could come back to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts today and look at how it's conducting itself. How happily it guards on the one hand against anarchy and confusion, and on the other against tyranny and oppression. Okay, so these are definitely things that they want to avoid. How carefully it separates the legislative from the executive, a point essential to liberty. How wisely it has provided for the impartial execution of the laws and the independent situation of the judges, a matter of capital moment and without which the freedom of the Constitution in other respects might be often delusory and not realized in the just security of the person and property of the subject. Okay, so um, people, the keepers of their own liberty. Okay, so this Constitution of the Commonwealth um, places a high value on liberty, right? In the words of Samuel Cooper, I think we could say, all right, so the first operating principle is that people under this government, under this Constitution, should be at liberty. That is, they know best how to conduct their lives. Now, the powers of government, um, I'm going to write over here a God ordered government. And so its powers are only to do good because those powers are designed as God says they should be, right? So they don't just, they're not just thinking, well, if you can show that that's a good thing to do, then okay, we'll do it. No, they're saying that the powers will only be for good because they're going to be limited to those powers that God designed that they should be. And those powers, here we see the separation of powers that we're so familiar with. I didn't spell that right, did I? Desperate has an E, separate has an A, right? Separation of powers. He continues, in addition to all this, what a broad foundation for the exercise of the rights of conscience is laid in this Constitution, which declares that no subject shall be hurt, molested, or restrained in his person, liberty, or estate for worshiping God in the manner and season most agreeable to the dictates of his own conscience, or for his religious profession or sentiments, and that every denomination of Christians, demeaning themselves peaceably and as good subjects of the Commonwealth, shall be equally under the protection of the law, and no subordination of any one sect or denomination to another shall be established by law. Okay, now, um, when we start reading this quotation here, and we read here for worshiping God, we read here religious profession or sentiments. Okay. I know it could be easiest for us to think that, oh, well, they're just saying, whatever, right? Whoever, whatever you think God is, whatever your religious sentiments are, just the broad spectrum. But then when it steps into this point, every denomination of Christians, I'm going to suggest that that defines or limits everything that came before as referencing the Christian religion, right? This God that's capitalized here means the God of the Bible, the God of Christianity. And so these religious professions or sentiments are within the bounds of Christianity. And so if you are worshiping God according to the dictates of your conscience within the confines of Christianity, you're not going to be hurt, molested, or restrained. And you could know that the other four denominations, right, that meet on the same corner as you or whatever, none of them are preferred by the government. Now, the next statement here is really important, and it's largely forgotten today. It, referring to the Constitution that they are celebrating at this time, Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it considers indeed morality and the public worship of God as important to the happiness of society. There's that word happiness again. Now, think about what he's saying here. This Constitution sees it this way. And so, doesn't that suggest that those who are elected to govern according to the Constitution must govern in a way that protects and makes space for the public worship of God, right? Now, they don't, it doesn't, they're not to make space for the public worship of God in the Presbyterian way or the Baptist way, whatever denomination you want to fill in there. But they are to make space for the public worship of God. They are to see that the public worship of God is not interrupted, not protested against, not um, infringed upon in any way. Uh, and why? Well, because do you want a happy society? Then there better be the free and unfettered public worship of God. In fact, they believed if you wanted a happy society, that there needed to be the public worship of God, which they decided that it meant as the government, they needed to pass particular laws to ensure that as many people as possible had the opportunity to attend public worship on Sunday. Now, as far as I know, none of them passed laws that required a person to attend public worship on Sunday, but they did pass a law, probably throughout the states. I mean, I don't know for sure, but certainly many of them passed a law um, insisting that no secular business be open on Sunday. Why? Because they wanted to give everybody the opportunity to participate in public worship of God. Why? Well, because that's important to the happiness of a society. And why did they care about that? Well, because that's what they are empowered to work towards, right? What did we read? What did our pastor tell us up here? That common security and happiness. That's why the Constitution was formed. And for them, and I would say this is evidence that this was a Christian nation, for them as elected officials who care about doing good to secure the common happiness for the society, they said gas stations, you're closed on, well, they didn't have gas stations, but horse water stations, you're closed on Sundays. Barbershop closed on Sundays. Attorney's office closed on Sunday. Mercantile shop closed on Sundays. At the same time, according to proper Christian teaching, I'm certain that if you know uh, a window was accidentally broken on Sunday, that um, you know the local shop may have opened up to provide a piece of wood to cover the broken window to make sure everything's secure and safe. I mean, it wasn't. I'm sure they were not so rigid that, well, sorry, you'll have to spend the night with that broken window there. Like I'm sure that they provided for circumstances like that. But in the main, tavern, you're closed on Sunday, right? Why? Well, so that people don't have to work, so that they have an opportunity to go to public worship. So that people who like to drink a lot can't, and they might end up at public worship. And surely it would be an affront to the people of this state, as the convention speak in their previous address, to labor to convince them that the honor and happiness of a people depend upon morality, and that the public worship of God has a tendency to inculcate the principles thereof, as well as to preserve a people from forsaking civilization and falling into a state of savage barbarity. Right. Um, I mean, it sounds like we shouldn't have to try to convince people of this. It's so well known that it is so well known that the honor and happiness of a people depend upon morality, that the public worship of God has a tendency to inculcate the principles thereof, the principles of morality, as well as to preserve a people from forsaking civilization and falling into a state of savage barbarity. Okay. And so then think about today, right? What's church attendance like? What's public worship of God like? And is it inculcating the principles of morality that serve as the foundation for honor and happiness of a people? And if it's failing in that and people aren't attending, is it a surprise then that we're falling into a state of savage barbarity in this country? Of these and other excellent properties of our present Constitution, the citizens of this state are thoroughly sensible or well informed, and jealous as they are of their rights, they never would have adopted and ratified it with so great a degree of unanimity. They know it is framed upon an extent of civil and religious liberty. What? This isn't a Christian country. They know it is framed upon an extent of civil and religious liberty, unexampled perhaps in any country in the world except America. This must highly endear it to them. And while it is written upon our own hearts, they have the satisfaction to find that it has already received the eulogiums of others, whose capacity and distinction rendered their testimony truly honorable. But lest, through the imperfection of human nature, and after all the deliberation and conscience with which it has been formed and approved, some inconveniences should be found lurking in it, of which experience can best inform us, a right is expressly reserved to the people of removing them in a revision of the whole after a fair experiment of 15 years. Right? So apparently this Constitution for the Commonwealth was written in such a way as this is it. You ratified it, you've got it for 15 years. Then, if you see there's a problem, fix it. When a people have the rare felicity of choosing their own government, every part of it should first be weighed in the balance of reason and nicely adjusted to the claims of liberty, equity, and order. Okay. What should the every part of the government should be what? Nicely adjusted to the claims of what? Liberty, equity, and order. Okay. Liberty, equity, and order. Not liberty, equality, and order, but equity. Okay. And you can look this up and confirm it later, but equity references that someone receives that which they deserve. Okay. Doesn't mean they receive an equal share with everybody else. They receive that which they deserve, right? If we think of a partnership, right, the equity that one partner has in the company is a reflection of the percentage of input into the company of you could say capital that they brought to the company, however the partnership determined that. But it doesn't mean that you have three partners, let's say, and that no matter what each contributes to establishing the partnership, they all get a one-third share. Now they could agree to that. I mean, equity would allow for equality if that's the agreement among the parties. Okay. But it could well be that one of the partners only deserves 10% ownership because what he brought into the company was only 10% of what it needed to get going, right? And that's not unfair. It's unequal, right? Because the other two partners in one proportion or another share the other 90% of ownership. It's unequal. It's not unfair. hopefully it's equitable, right? But when this is done, a warm and passionate patriotism should be added to the result of cool deliberation to put in motion and animate the whole machine. The citizens of a free republic should reverence their constitution. They should not only calmly approve and readily submit to it, but regard it with also with veneration and affection rising even to an enthusiasm, like that which prevailed at Sparta and at Rome. Nothing can render a commonwealth more illustrious, nothing more powerful than such a manly, such a sacred fire. Everything will then be subordinated to the public welfare. Every labor necessary to this will be cheerfully endured, every expense readily submitted to, every danger boldly confronted. Okay, so this reverence for the Constitution that should be in the citizens of a free republic, that should fill them with an enthusiasm that could be described or is here described as a warm and passionate patriotism. And Cooper's saying that's nothing but good um, for the free republic. Okay, may this heavenly flame animate all orders of men in the state. May it catch from bosom to bosom and the glow be universal. May a double portion of it inhabit the breasts of our civil rulers and impart a luster to them like that which sat upon the face of Moses when he came down from the holy mountain with the tables of the Hebrew constitution in his hand, exclamation point. Right? Cooper's hammering this point home. Okay. Now notice, he referenced Sparta and Rome for the enthusiasm there was among the people for their country, their state. So he acknowledged that historically. But when he got into the heart of the matter, what does he turn to? He turns to the Hebrew Republic, the Hebrew Constitution, right? That's the source, real source, true source of the thinking of the founding fathers uh, concerning government. Thus will they sustain with true dignity the first honors, the first marks of esteem and confidence, the first public employments bestowed by this new commonwealth, and in which they this day appear. Such men must naturally care for our state, men whose abilities and virtues have obtained a sanction from the free suffrages of their enlightened and virtuous fellow citizens. Okay, so let's think about that sentence right there. Men whose abilities and virtues have obtained a sanction, that's a vote of approval, from the free suffrages, this suffrage here is voting, of their enlightened, virtuous fellow citizens. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on there. Um, those who are nominated for office are men of ability and virtue, and those who vote for them are individuals who are enlightened. They know something about these individuals running for office, and they themselves are virtuous. So, yeah, virtue all the way around is necessary, expected. Are not these suffrages a public and solemn testimony that, in the opinion of their constituents, they are men who have steadily acted upon the noble principles on which the frame of our government now rests? Men who have generously neglected their private interest in the ardent pursuit of that of the public. Okay, so think about that when you realize that um, many of these politicians, especially elected to Congress, um, apparently begin their political career in Congress with a modest um, uh, whatever it's called, you know, how wealthy a person is, right? It's modest, relatively modest. And yet at some point in their political career, they become multimillionaires. Like, are those people that have neglected their private interest in the ardent pursuit of that of the public? Now, obviously, any person can have a successful business and, become wealthy from that. You'd have to ask the question, is that what's happening with those I've referenced in Congress today? Men who have intrepidly opposed one of the greatest powers on earth and put their fortunes and their lives to no small hazard in fixing the basis of our freedom and honor, who can forbear congratulating our rising state and casting up a thankful eye to heaven, or who can forbear congratulating our rising state and casting up a thankful eye to heaven upon this great and singular occasion, the establishment of our congregation, our nobles freely chosen by ourselves, and our governor coming forth at the call of his country from the midst of us. So, in the midst of the congratulations for the rising state of Massachusetts, there's also the humble acknowledgement of uh, Providence, right? Heaven, Providence, God has had a hand in this. Nobles freely chosen by ourselves, sorry. And then this, if you don't recall, this references his um, verse that started his whole sermon. If we go back to the beginning, sorry for scrolling fast. What's his verse? Their congregation shall be established before me. Their nobles shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from the midst of them. Okay, so if we go back, I won't scroll this time. I'll click here. If we go back, um, in fact, it's this whole part here. Our neighbors, our nobles freely chosen by ourselves, our governor coming forth at the call of his country from the midst of us. All right. So he's saying that what we've done here in Massachusetts is we have followed the instructions from Jeremiah, which were instructions during the return to Jerusalem from captivity, and how to set up their new government in that return, which was nothing more than hearkening all the way back to the time of Moses and the Hebrew Republic and how they set up their country, or how God set up their country. Yeah, Christianity had nothing to do with the founding of this country, right? Come on. There, in this election sermon, he is making the direct connection between ideas of representation, governmental representation, government form and purpose from the Bible, and saying that's what we're doing. And I'm just going to say that's what a Christian nation does. Behold, the man whose name as President of Congress authenticates that immortal act which in form constitutes the independence of these United States. So that's interesting. He uses that phrase, United States, but he doesn't use it. And when we say the United States of America, we think of one consolidated mass, and we really shouldn't. We probably should refrain from saying it that way. We wouldn't say these United States of America. We would say this United States of America, the United States of America as a single unit. What does he say? These United States. Or another way to say it is these states united one to another. And then he says, and by which, referring to that immortal act, by which a nation was literally born in a day. See him who had taken too early and decided apart and done too much for the liberties of America to be forgiven by its enemies. See him whose name, with that of another distinguished patriot, was expressly accepted from a British act of grace, and upon whose head a price was virtually bid by those who meant to enslave us. Behold, this very man, declared by the voice of his country, the head of the corner in our political building, the first magistrate of this free commonwealth, it was not in the power of his fellow citizens to give a higher testimony how well they remember the generous and important services he has already rendered to his country and how much they confide in his disposition and abilities still to serve it. Well, who is he talking about here? Maybe you already know. If we go back to the beginning of this sermon, sorry, I'm scrolling fast again there. Um, sermon preached before His Excellency John Hancock, who was to be governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He's beginning his office on this day. Well, actually on October 25, 1780, I guess. This was preached on June 24, 1780, in anticipation of that, is how I understand that. But it was John Hancock. That was who he was speaking of there. Um, and now he spoke of another, right? His name with that of another distinguished patriot. Well, who was that? The other distinguished patriot. I'm pretty sure he's referring to Samuel Adams here. I think it was John Hancock and Samuel Adams who were the two accepted from a British act of grace. Like the at that point, like the colonists cared, right? But yeah, the British government or parliament was so angry at these two. Um, so I mean, this is a pretty you could see that this is a pretty emotional moment, right? This is a moment of great importance to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because they're looking at, remember, they're looking at the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, the one who dramatically signed his name so big that the king wouldn't have to put his glasses on to read it. I think is how that went. All right, let's continue a little bit longer here. We're at page 12, trying to get to page 19. May God Almighty take His Excellency and the other honorable branches of the government, the Lieutenant Governor, the Council, the Senate, the House of Representatives, into His holy protection and unite them in measures glorious to themselves and happy to their country. There's that word again. Vested as they are with particular honors, they have a painful preeminence. A painful preeminence. Their distinctions call them to the most weighty and important cares at a time when the administration of public affairs is attended with peculiar difficulties. They need, therefore, the gracious direction and assistance of the blessed and only potentate, which in this solemn assembly of rulers and people we jointly and devoutly implore. Okay, so I don't know what I don't know what it takes to demonstrate conclusively that this was a Christian nation, right? Well, that's what a Christian nation does. And if you bring this up and somebody argues back to you, well, yeah, that's just because that's the sort of thing they did then. The correct response is yes. because that's what a Christian nation does. It does those sorts of things. You're just making my point. All right. The people of a free state have a right to expect from those whom they have honored with the direction of their public concerns a faithful and unremitting attention to these concerns. He who accepts a public trust pledges himself his sacred honor and by his official oath appeals to his God that with all good fidelity and to the utmost of his capacity, he will discharge this trust. Okay, so appeals to his God. So, whatever God he has. Well, no, that's not what that means. Um, right? What was the understanding? There's one true God. And, whatever your um, disposition is with that God, he's still your God, right? He may be smiling on you because you belong to Jesus, or he may have a countenance of wrath towards you because you do not belong to Jesus. Either way, he's your God. And that is the God of the Bible to whom an oath is made. This wasn't just a vain ceremony. For the most part, well, in fact, I think that you're going to find that in every one of these constitutions from these colonies, as they are free and independent states, I think you're going to find in the beginning of every single one of those constitutions some appeal to God. Now you find it colonially in the different compacts, the Mayflower Compact, for example. There's an appeal to God because, and in the forming of the covenant, God was brought into it as the ultimate arbitrator judge of the covenant. The forming of the covenant was of such serious importance that if you're not willing to take an oath appealing to God for your part in the covenant, then why should we trust you? It's like the old story of the judge. The witness would not take the oath, and the judge said to the witness, "Well, if you are not willing to swear before God that what you're about to say is true, then there's no reason for the court to hear your testimony, because why would the court expect it to be true?" This is this is largely forgotten today. I watch a lot of live streaming of court cases. It's just a thing that I do, and there are still some courts that when the um, witness is sworn in, they actually, well, in fact, the New Jersey case, when witnesses are sworn in, they actually put a hand on the Bible. I was like, whoa, man. They put a hand on the Bible, they raise their right hand and take the oath, and so help you God is included. That's great. I mean, we need that restored, and we need it restored with seriousness, not just some vain repetition, with seriousness, right? In those situations, an elected official, a witness sworn in, people need to understand this is an acknowledgement of the seriousness of what we're dealing with here. Right? You're taking a special oath appealing to God for his affirmation, if you will, of the veracity, the truth of what you're going to do, what you're going to say, how you're going to govern. And that commonwealth which does not keep an eye of care upon those who govern and observe how they behave in their several departments in order to regulate its suffrages upon this standard will soon find itself in perplexity and cannot expect long to preserve either its dignity or, there's that word again, happiness. Now, it looks to me like dignity is going to be taken up in this paragraph. maybe happiness taken up in this paragraph. But what he's saying here is that this is critical if you want this dignity and happiness. That's what he's saying. And we'll learn more about that. We're on page 12 of 19. We made some progress here. We're on page 12 of 19 of our 1780 sermon, Election Day sermon. And as we've gone through this, we've learned a lot of history. We've learned something about the mindset of the colonists who are now free and independent states, citizens, establishing their state constitution as they're becoming a new nation. So this is exciting. At least it is to me. Maybe it is to you. If it is to you, there's a like button. If you're not subscribed, you can subscribe, share the video, and leave a comment or two. That would be great. Appreciate you joining me, whether you join me live or watch this video later. I hope it was helpful and instructive and really helps to establish not just the tradition of election sermons, but the importance of these election sermons and how they inform us so much about what was meant for our governing officials to be like and to do. So glad you joined tonight. And please join our other live streams during the week. And love to have you be a part of those. Um, yeah, so have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.